Welcome to the Flight Club Podcast, a woman's guide to leaning out. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at business launch and growth through the stories of successful female entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Felina Hansen, founder and CEO of Hera Hub.
Hello and welcome. I am really excited to share my conversation with Valerie Grant. She has worked with nonprofit organizations and for-profit organizations to help obtain grant funding since 1998. She has so much experience. It's incredible, and I'm really excited to learn more personally about the world of grant writing. Grant consulting services assists organizations through project development, comprehensive funding searches, expert grant management, and professional grant proposal and writing. And of course, she is an accomplished freelance writer and a published author. And I'm excited again to sort of maybe hopefully dispel some of the myths of grant writing, because I believe there's a lot of misconceptions perhaps out there. So with that, welcome to the show today, Valerie.
Oh, thank you, Felina. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Fantastic. Well, let's dive in to your background. Tell us a little bit about your background. Where are you from? Where'd you go from there?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest, in Metro Detroit more specifically, and was raised up in the kind of a tough, hard work ethic, blue collar, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get the job done. And I tend to still operate that way today. It's kind of ingrained within me. And so when I am working on a task, I see it through to completion. And I did move from the Midwest to the East Coast to Virginia and attended school there for a couple of years. And I studied social work, which I think was just a fabulous experience. I went to Norfolk State University and learned a whole lot there. And then I moved back to Michigan and thought that it would be great to be around family, and I finished my degree in business administration. And I chose that because I thought with the social work and the business side, that would be great skill sets to do the type of work that I am doing, and that's consulting with organizations to help them raise funds.
And had you always been interested in, well, not always, but maybe throughout your college career? I mean, how did you decide to come to this career? Was there some, an experience or someone you met?
Yes, definitely an experience. And I came by this career quite by accident, which happens a lot in grant writing because it's, nobody typically aspires to be a grant writer when they're growing up.
Most people don't know what it is, they hear about it-ish, but that's why I'm excited to dive into it and really explain to folks exactly what it is and how it works.
Yes. Well, for myself, I was working at a nonprofit organization when I lived in Virginia. And with a lot of nonprofits, sometimes we wear multiple hats. So I had 2 or 3 part-time jobs. I was the volunteer coordinator and the transportation coordinator. And a colleague needed some assistance with writing a grant application. She didn't have time, and I wanted to be a team player. So I said, well, let me try. And I wrote the application. It was awarded, and I said, hey, I kind of like that. So then I started helping with writing more and more grant applications and started getting funded. And that just, from there it morphed into me starting and setting up my own business to do grant consulting. And, it's taken off from there.
That's fantastic. So talk a little bit about the work you do now, and maybe after that kind of reflect back on maybe some of the the work you've done in the past, how they relate. You've got such a breadth of experience in this. I'm sure you have done many things as it relates to grant writing.
Right. Well, part of it is learning about how nonprofit organizations operate and how they're slightly different. And if you're a nonprofit, you need to obtain funding from other people or organizations. And so what I do now is we have a full grant service company, and we help organizations to do a grant assessment, really, to determine, are you ready to try to obtain grants, and sometimes organizations just are not, so we can help them to become grant ready so that they can show that there's a need in the community that they're meeting. They can show that they are doing the same thing internally that they're doing externally. So are you doing a good job inside your organization as well as outside of your organization? And there's a lot of other criteria that we use. So grant readiness, especially for newer organizations, is important. And then we can help organizations conduct a funding search to identify funders. If they already have funders identified, then we can help write the grant proposal. And then post-award, if they are actually awarded, then we can assist with the grant management and the follow-up reporting. And also the relationship building, at least being an invisible participant in helping nonprofit organizations begin to build relationship with funders so that they can continue their good work together in the community.
Yeah, I would imagine this is, it can be a complex relationship, right?
Definitely, yes. When there are expectations and funds being given, that it can be complex, but also together they can do great work and help meet a lot of needs.
That's great. So, give us a little, if you don't mind, Valerie. I'll say it a little broader. Nonprofit funding 101, because I know grants are a big part of nonprofit funding, but there are other vehicles that nonprofits use as well. Do you mind just kind of paint the picture of what the possibilities are for fundraising for nonprofits?
Sure. The majority of fundraising for nonprofits actually come from individual donors and not grants. And so that's one of the misperceptions that we try to help organizations to understand is don't expect grant funds to be more than 20% of your budget because it's not realistic. And the statistics show that 78 to 80% of funding comes from individuals that give to their faith-based organizations or to arts or the zoo or education institutions. Yeah. So that's the largest part. Other funding sources could be gifts that are given after somebody passes away, and gifts of stock from companies to organizations. But the majority of the grant funding comes from individual donations, and then fees for services such as an orchestra or symphony that might be nonprofit. If they sell tickets, that would be one way of obtaining funding.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just ran into a young woman yesterday at Hera Hub, Mission Valley. She's doing some training in her space, and she has a nonprofit called Mending Matters here locally. And the majority of her funding, we were chatting about it, is coming from the school districts. So what she does is she's created a program for students who perhaps are having behavioral issues or other issues. Instead of expelling them or sending them to detention, they have programs where they're really supporting those students and educating them and mentoring them, so they get into a better place, basically, as opposed to maybe repeating that pattern. And so her funding is coming from the school district as a nonprofit organization. So how would you classify that? I guess that's fee for service, essentially, right?
Yes,
Okay.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, interesting. And she hasn't gotten into the world of grants yet because that has worked relatively well for her, although, she's looking to grow the program. And so what we were talking about yesterday is, okay, what's available grant wise? So question about grants. Talk about the difference between, and I'm probably going to use the wrong language here, Valerie, but kind of like private grants versus public grants. So maybe just the different types of grants that are out there.
Sure. The way I think I classify them are three different types. There's government funding, which is what most people hear about. Oh, there's grants for that, and they're referring to government funding. And then also corporate funding, where companies will give funding to help causes that they believe in, and then foundation funding through grants. So all three of those are probably the three major types. And for this particular case that you're talking about, there might be, room for federal, state, or regional government funding, which could be helpful and advantageous. But then also there probably would be some foundations that are especially interested in childhood education or youth development that might want to give, and partner with an organization like that within schools.
Great. Okay. And what typically, I'm going to jump to the outcome of all this. What
Okay.
typically are grantors, no, yes, grantors
Right.
expecting of the grantee in regards to outcomes, reporting, maybe even a case study if you have, of one of your clients, what oftentimes is being asked to show proof essentially that this money was put to good use.
Right. And that is primarily done in the follow-up reporting. As far as outcomes, we like to use statistics or data. So X number of students were assisted by this program, and then show how they were helped. That's really the outcome. So maybe their grades improved by 2 points, or they feel more comfortable being in the classroom setting. So those could be outcomes. And the way those come about is when you submit the grant request, you want to let the funder know specifically what you're going to do, and then do that within the grant period, and then report on that. And if you missed it a little bit, that's okay with funders typically. Just be honest and say, we fell short on this one outcome. We only helped 20 students instead of 50, and here's why, and here's what we're going to do to improve that in the future. And generally, funders are very understanding and want to continue to help and assist. A couple things about funders that I feel like is important to share is that most organizations want general operating support. They want money to pay salaries. They want money to pay the lights and the rent. And only about 15% of foundations or corporations actually give general operating support. So that is not something that you generally want to go after with the grant request. You want to ask for capacity building, possibly for funding for a new program, or funding to scale up an already established program. That's what the majority of funders are interested in seeing proposals for.
Yeah, makes sense, right? But
Right.
that can be challenging, right? As you said, you've got to pay staff, you got to keep the lights on.
Right.
So
Right.
I can see where that could rub a bit. What is, I'm sure your success rate, Valerie, is 100% in applications to grant funding, being awarded.
Yeah.
But just in general, let's say I'm a nonprofit organization, or we'll take my example from the thread we were on just a minute ago with Mending Matters. Can you give just even a rough ballpark of what you see as far as applications versus grants if the nonprofit is well qualified, I guess?
Right, and that's where the footwork prior to submitting the application is really important. I always research in depth a potential funder to make sure that the organization that I'm working with falls within their focus area, within their guidelines. We don't want to submit an application for somebody like Mending Matters when a particular foundation or corporation only works with senior citizens. It just
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be a good
Yeah.
match. So
Yeah.
definitely doing the work prior to make sure that you have a good solid foundation, and trying to establish a connection, if possible, with that foundation or that funding organization is important. And then for a statistic that I've used in the past is about 33 to 35% of applications are actually funded. Most organizations, most funders or grantors receive far, far more money applications than they can fund.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a limited pool of money, and they just can't do everything that they would like to. So 33% is good. And you know what, in baseball, if you're batting 300, that kind of makes you an all-star. So I feel like, 33% in the grant world makes us an all-star as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. What
Right.
would a nonprofit look to budget for somebody like yourself, or how does that work?
As far as payment
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah. Yeah.
it really depends on the scope of work. A lot of organizations have staff grant writers or grant
Mm-hmm.
development managers, and so that's a staff position. So it depends on, again, the scope of the work, and that can range from a couple of $100s to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on how many proposals do you want to submit. Are you grant ready, or is that something I'm going to help you to do, is to get grant ready? If they're a smaller organization or a larger organization. So there is really a wide variety of, how much they can expect to budget. But that's something that I go over in detail before ever engaging in work with a particular client.
Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely. So, and this is again, I'm probably asking questions that are not exactly, maybe need to be massaged to answer, but how small is too small, right? If I'm a nonprofit and I've only been, doing this work for a year, let's say, and I've got an operating budget of $50,000. I mean,
Right.
at what point am I ready, so to speak, to play in this whole world of grant writing?
Right. Well, they might be ready if you have an interesting program that is making an impact in the community. You might be ready even after 6 months to
Mm,
go ahead and start writing grant applications. It all depends, again, on the scope. But, at any time, you can take a look and see if you're ready. But some of the things that can help organizations to get ready is to engage with other community stakeholders, build up a base of supporters, because funders want to see that there's community buy-in. So
mm,
do you have volunteers that help your
yeah.
organization? Great. That means that people care about what you're doing. Are there other potential funders that have expressed an interest in working with your organization? And then showing really how is your impact? Are you making an impact in what you're doing? Or if you have more funds, if you obtain grant funding, will your impact be greater? Those
Yeah.
are some things that you want to demonstrate.
Yeah. Makes sense. How many, and this is again, kind of an opinion question. So when we look at how many nonprofit organizations there are just in the county of San Diego, for example, I've heard
Okay.
numbers being thrown around of like 12, 13,000 nonprofit organizations in the county of San Diego. Again, you can dispel that number if for whatever reason I have the wrong number in my head. But how many of those do you feel like are a bit duplicative, maybe, of one another, maybe have similar missions? And is there any effort to, and you kind of explained this in your last answer a little bit, to get nonprofits to maybe work together more in some cases? Because I just feel like sometimes, they're almost fighting each other for the same dollars. And it's like, hey, let's all collaborate.
Right, right. And collaboration is definitely not just a buzzword, but it's definitely important in the nonprofit world. And it's interesting because we these organizations compete for funds, yet they do need to collaborate and work together in order to help the people that they want to serve. And there certainly is a lot of collaboration. I've worked with a couple of organizations in San Diego County specifically that works with, let's say, Tri-City Medical Care to provide mental health services, another organization that works with some theater groups and providing props and other things that they need to put their productions on. So there is definitely room for collaboration, and I always suggest that, especially when trying to obtain government funding. They want to see collaborative efforts, and really to be competitive with government funding, you need to work together with either similar organizations or other organizations to make a greater impact, because those funding dollars tend to be higher. You have to have a higher impact.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What do you think, Valerie, about this trend of what's kind of being called social impact entrepreneurs or social impact companies? And that the thought behind that is, we are going to, people profit planet, we're going to make money, but also give back and do good. So Tom's Shoes is probably one of the most well-known
Right.
examples of this, right? For every shoe they make, they send a pair to, children in emerging countries, that type of thing. Has that, I'll just ask directly, is that a good thing? Does that, change sort of the tone of the landscape of nonprofits? Or some nonprofits thinking, hey, we should be going towards social impact and maybe not, relying totally on grants and things of that nature? Although you did say, fee for service, there's folks out there doing that too. But just in general, what is your perception of that?
I think it's great and wonderful. I kind of refer to them as social enterprise, but maybe that's an older world. But so social impact.
Yeah.
I think it's great. It gives more opportunity to help people. There's, becoming greater and greater needs in the world, and globally we're able to do more with organizations like Tom's Shoes that you said, and with other especially women-owned businesses in countries that don't always have a lot of opportunity. For example, I know of one organization that works with women in the sub-Saharan region of Africa and gives them micro loans so that they can create jewelry, and then they bring their jewelry over to the States, the organization, and sells it for them. So, that's an example of how the economy is globalized and how social enterprise is more global and can impact not just our region, but a whole other continent as well, and give women opportunities to be entrepreneurs that just wouldn't otherwise have any opportunity at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. So many amazing movements out there around that. It's incredible to see. Well, Valerie, what is on the horizon for your business? What's next?
What is next? Well, we continue to enjoy helping organizations that help people. That is where my heart is. I love doing that. My team is growing, and that's exciting. And so I'm scaling up the business so that we can be more impactful, so that we can help more organizations to meet the needs of people that they serve. And so we right now have clients in Washington, D.C., Northern California, and really across the United States. So we are expanding, like I said, and just looking forward to scaling up and helping more and more organizations.
Fantastic. And if our listeners want to get in touch with you, Valerie, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, please look at my website at www.grantconsultingservices.com. We're also on social media, Twitter. The Twitter handle is @GrantWriter. We have LinkedIn and also a Facebook page, Grant Consulting Services. So through any of those avenues, I'd be delighted to chat with anybody.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Valerie.
Oh, thank you for having me, Felina. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Flight Club, sponsored by Hera Hub. We look forward to sharing more success stories with you soon.